Powered paragliding has evolved to be so different from paragliding that I would rather use a special term paramotoring. Let's talk about the 10 differences between paragliding and paramotoring. Welcome to paramotoring. Maybe you've just seen a paramotor flying over the beach or came across a paramotor YouTube video and are super excited about this sport. We are here to answer all the questions of wannabe pilots. The difference in abilities. Paragliders cannot fly level flights. You glide down, let's say for every 10 meters you descend 1 meter. Without finding an updraft wind, you inevitably go for landing. Paramotors can fly level flight, and if you add more throttle you can even climb. You have your own personal source of lift on your back. With a paramotor, you can fly pretty much anywhere. With the paragliders, you are quite limited. And surprisingly, it is this limitation that makes paragliding so appealing to many pilots. And it's exactly the same limitation that makes paragliding so frustrating to many pilots. There are different styles in flying. Ridge soaring is the simplest form of paragliding. Acrobatics might be the most complex, but the most typical style of paragliding is cross-country flying. For paramotoring, it's the same. You can do acrobatics, you can do slalom flying, but the most typical is cross-country exploration and sightseeing flying, and this is what I will refer to in this video. Difference number 2 is that we fly at different times of the day. Paragliding is usually done midday because you need the thermals to climb. You find the thermal, find the core, circle to the cloud base, and then you start a straight flight to the point where you expect the next thermal to be. And you repeat this the whole day until the sun gets lower and it stops heating up the ground and the thermals simply die. You go for landing. Paramotors can fly all day, but most pilots prefer to fly early morning and late evening because you don't need the thermal. And you actually want to avoid the thermal. Thermals are turbulent, so if you don't need the thermal to climb, why would you fight with it? So if you plan to fly, let's say 2 hours a day, you choose the best 2 hours, which are the super butter smooth air, super calm, low wind in the morning or in the evening. You might have a reason to fly all day. We did that during the Icarus Trophy and the Wingman Challenge. These were unsupported paramotor adventures covering 2,000 kilometers in 10 days, carrying our camping gear and everything. And we basically used the whole day. So there were days where I refilled my fuel tank 3 or 4 times. We fly at different weather conditions. For paragliding, you need a sunny day because the sun is generating the thermals. You cannot fly in overcast conditions. Paramotoring in overcast conditions is not only possible, it's actually even more enjoyable, more calm and funny. You have a lot wider range of weather conditions for paramotoring, and that could give you a lot more airtime. We fly at different altitudes. For paragliding, we typically fly, let's say 700 meters above the valley all the way up to the cloud base. Simply because up higher the thermals are stronger and easier to find. Flying low increases the risk of not finding the thermal in time and being forced for landing. Typical altitude for flying a paramotor would be around 100 to 300 meters, which is about 300 to 1,000 feet. That's the best altitude for sightseeing, but you can fly anywhere to super low, like dragging your foot on the ground, or even dive into the valleys and canyons, or you can fly even up higher, like around and over the clouds, which is rarely possible with paragliders. We typically fly at different locations. Paragliding is usually done in the mountains, where you take off from a hill and then you search for your thermals. Paragliding in the flatlands, it's quite difficult. Towing, winching is not really accessible. It's kind of tricky thing. This is why many pilots eventually switch to paramotors, because in the flatlands is their only option to fly. I live in the flatlands, and that's how I got to paramotoring, but I actually love to fly my paramotor in the mountains. I love to climb to the mountains in the evening where it's all quiet and calm and I can come so close to the mountains, which I cannot do midday when it's turbulent. It's a very, very different experience of the same thing. So I actually fly the mountains with my paramotors quite often. Different skills are required. Paragliding to me is more like playing chess. It requires a lot of preparation prior to flying itself, studying the terrain, studying the weather forecast, but also ability to read the terrain and the weather on the spot while in flight. You also need to fine-tune your coring abilities, your skills, to take the maximum of each thermal and constantly adapting to whatever comes onto you. The difference between a good pilot and a really good pilot is very clear and obvious. The really good one can stay a lot longer in the air and fly longer distance. Now, there is no skill involved in flying longer on a paramotor. You just need to take more fuel and hold the throttle for a longer time. And this is why paragliding pilots quite often look a little bit down upon paramotor pilots, because they don't really see the skill there. But I've experienced it many times that paragliding pilots try paramotoring for the first time and flying around obstacles. They were surprised how poorly they controlled the glider, because all the time they fly up high without any reference. So when you pull a turn 2,000, 5,000 feet up, you have no reference, you have no idea how the turn actually was. But once they started to fly around pylons like figure eights, they were surprised that every turn was different and they ended up being too wide or too high, or even worse, too low, and their glider control was really poor. So there's a lot of skill in paramotoring. It's just totally different than paragliding. Although they look similar, paragliding wings and paramotor wings are very different, simply because they have different priorities when designing the wing. For paragliding, efficiency, the glide ratio, is the key point. Once you climb the thermal to the cloud base and you're heading for your straight flight, you want to glide as far as possible. For paramotors, the glide ratio is not so important because we can compensate with the engine. What we want with paramotoring is speed range. You want it to be slow on takeoff because you need to run, but then you want it to be fast in the air. And this is achieved by incorporating so-called reflex profile. This reflex profile has higher speed range, but lower efficiency. The huge benefit of the reflex profile on paramotors is also that the reflex profile is a lot more collapse resistant. And this is what you really need when you fly low to the ground and you don't have enough altitude for eventual recovery of a collapse. So you want it to be collapse resistant. Also, paramotor wings tend to be usually smaller and a lot more agile. They turn much faster and they're kind of a lot more fun to fly. So whenever I fly my paragliding wing, compared to my advanced paramotor wing, it feels like driving a school bus. And there is a reason for that, because paragliding wings are designed to make wide open flat turns to maintain altitude, while paramotor wings are made for fun and sharp turns. On paragliding and paramotoring, we get to see different views. To illustrate this, I'll tell you a story. It was a few years ago when I went to Südtirol for paragliding, and I stayed there for 3 or 4 days, taking off on the same mountain in Spijkboden. And I did very, very good paragliding. I loved that very much. Now, several months later, I came for a family ski trip to the same spot, to the same village. And I was shocked to see there is a beautiful medieval castle right underneath the takeoff spot. I didn't notice it before. I did paragliding for 3 or 4 days in the same location, and I didn't notice the beautiful medieval castle simply because I was so focused on reading the terrain, looking at the clouds, checking their shapes, and trying to guess what the trigger of the thermal could be, that I didn't do sightseeing. And that's the different thing. With paragliding, you're mostly up high and and fly the clouds, so to say. While with the paramotoring, you can fly so close. If I had my paramotor there, I would fly right next to the tower. Or you can fly into a canyon or right next to a waterfall, almost like touching it. It's a very, very different experience. Paramotoring and paragliding also has a very different culture. Paragliding is basically an individual sport. It's quite difficult to fly in a group because once you are in the air, you realize that some pilots are more skilled or have a faster glider or have more luck on that day. Flying in a group on paramotor is actually very easy, and it's also great fun. We communicate on radio, we talk, we fly in formations, take photos of each other. There are also many non-competitive paramotor gatherings where paramotor pilots just meet for the day, fly a little bit, barbecue, beer, and great stories. It's kind of a different community. Paragliding is typically a lot more competitive, and I'm not referring to the actual competitions, but everyday flying. Pilots log their flights, they upload their flights to websites like xcontest.org when you can compare yourself to others. The aim is to perform better than you performed last year, or fly longer and longer distance than other pilots on the same spot on the same day. And it's kind of probably challenge is a better word than competition. It's more like challenging yourself to become better, more skilled, more trained, more capable. You can challenge yourself in paramotoring as well, of course, but it's not the typical. There's a lot more camaraderie, exploration, sightseeing, and taking good photos in paramotoring than the really challenging yourself. So is it paragliding or paramotoring more appealing to you? Well, you don't need to pick. I mean, I know many pilots that do both, and I myself, I love both. And actually, I would recommend to do both. There are skills you learn in paragliding that are absolutely useful in paramotoring, but also the opposite way. There are skills you learn in paramotoring that can be very useful in paragliding. These two sports are so different. They don't exclude each other, and they're definitely complementary. Either way, please start with proper training. No gear can compensate for proper training, and YouTube is not an instructor. This video series is not intended to substitute training. This video series is intended to provide you quick answers to your questions, but leave you hungry for more. Ask your instructor. If you would need help finding an instructor, feel free to reach out to us. Thank you very much. Thanks for watching, and see you soon.